Hey folks, BlackCross here, and welcome to another video review. This one is going to be on Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree. Technically, this is a DLC, so in other words, it's not going to be looked at as a traditional review per se, because basically the same concept of mechanics in the base game, but with additional content added to it. With that said, I do have some personal thoughts and opinions. So, to kind of make things better for you guys, I'm not going to show any footage in regards to the DLC, and instead I'm going to tell you about my personal experiences and what I thought about it from the very start up until the very end. And there's no easy way of explaining this, is there? So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of start things off to literally before the DLC got released. So there's a lot of people that was talking about the game and everything like that, and even some of the ones that was kind of leaking out and stuff. Thankfully I didn't get any spoilers or anything like that, because I was kind of distant from Elden Ring content at the moment. So I decided to finally dive into it whenever the DLC came out. And then when the DLC did come out, I started playing through on a new profile and everything like that, building my character, and I built a pretty good and a very stable build, if I might add. I heard a lot of people talking about the DLC, basically saying that it was hard. And I'm like, guys, this is From Software. These are the same people who have been notorious for releasing the DLC content and it moderately be harder than your traditional playthrough of the games and stuff. So of course it's going to be hard. So that's why I wanted to go through on new profiles, because I knew that if I played it on New Game Plus, it would be harder for me to handle. So I thought, you know what, let's do that. Let's survive it and everything like that. But then there was a comment that was made where Miyazaki basically said the phrase, and I quote, "The game scales with you." And I'm like, is he referring to New Game Plus, or is he referring to base game? That had me confused for a while. Then I finally got to the part where I was able to enter into the DLC. And if you don't know how to enter into the DLC, just to give you a quick notion of what boss you need to fight before you can even remotely get close to it, it's going to be Mog, the Lord of Blood, I think is what it is. But anyway, you beat him, and then after you beat him, you then have the ability to enter into the DLC. Now, record, that's practically almost towards the end of the base game anyway, so it kind of makes sense for why you would need to have really good equipment, very good level up weapons, and so on and so forth. Then I got into the DLC, and I was like, this is going to be so cool. And at first, the enemies aren't too awful bad. The enemies are somewhat decent. They're not too bad. Basically, the enemies I was able to handle with no problem. But then I decided to fight this giant furnace golem. Basically, these things that you probably saw in the trailer. And I fought them. 2 hits. In 2 hits, I died. I'm like, wow. That's ridiculous. Then I thought about it and I was like, oh, maybe this is just one case. I'll move on to a boss and we'll go from there. Then I tried to tackle on one of these sub-bosses in like these nameless mausoleums and stuff like that. And once again, 2 hits. Just whack, whack. And I'm like, what am I doing wrong? I didn't quite understand what I was doing wrong. I was like, what the frick? How? Not even the base bosses 2-hit me, unless I just decide to level up everything else except for HP. But even then, I never had that issue. What happened? And that wasn't until I discovered an item. Now, the proper pronunciation, according to a lot of people, say is called the Erdtree fragment. And that's whenever I realized that there was a hidden mechanic in the game, and I don't know how to feel about that. So, basically, they decided to add in a new mechanic to the Elden Ring's DLC, which is a new form of level mechanic. Basically, this level mechanic allows you to have like your standard stats, but with these Erdtree fragments, you're able to add in an extra layer of bonus to the build itself. For example, it gives you extra attack and defense, but it's only access only for the DLC. In other words, if you go back into the base game, it converts back to your main stats. But if you go back to the DLC, the additional bonus will be added on top to it. So it's one of those things where it's like, so I have to hunt down the Erdtree fragments. Now, that's not the only thing you have to hunt down. There's also these ash remains that you can use in order to basically increase the defense and attack power of your spirits / allies. So that was interesting to know that. But I was trying to figure out, okay, so I gotta find these things. I'm afraid to ask, how many are there? I looked it up, and thankfully there are not that many of them. Not as many as I thought there was, and definitely not as complicated, but it does require a little bit of progression into the game itself, naturally. So in other words, you might end up in a position in which where you might get stuck in certain areas, and it makes it hard to kind of backtrack to go into other areas, because at this point in the game, you're not really going to get much from leveling up your stats and stuff. The only thing that you would be doing would be like fine-tuning your build, probably, and that would be about it. After that, it's like you're already at 100 plus levels, so it's like, what else can you level up that would be beneficial for the DLC at this rate? Nothing, sadly, until you get all of the fragments for the DLC, and that way you could actually get through the game moderately easy. I say easy, but easier than what the DLC is giving you at this rate. So, that's what I did. After being beaten down to a pulp, I decided to look up a guide on where the Erdtree fragments are. And gosh, this map, while yes, it's only a quarter of the size of like the main base game, the way to traverse the area can be complex. Like, it is insane as to how much layering this game is when it comes down to it. There's so much depth into it, there's so much twists and turns. If you want to be able to progress in the game, just a map alone is not going to help you. Because there's a lot of dips, there's a lot of tunnels, there's a lot of ledges. There's a lot more platforming that needs to be done in order to progress into further parts of the game. And it's like, how do I do this? And I eventually do it, but at the same time too, I'm like, if I didn't have this guide, I wouldn't know what to do. Because here's the thing, while I'm trying to find these fragments, I'm also trying to survive everything else. What do I mean? Well, like I said, you have to progress through the game somewhat decently in order to progress into other areas and stuff. Meaning you have to fight more bosses. As we have discussed before, some of these bosses have been able to two-shot me. So it's like, okay, I'm going to try to get as many fragments as I can and see what happens. And even at the lowest range of like 5 at this point, you know, there's like, sort of like your Estus flags. Your Estus flag is like +1, +2. In this case, mine is like Micula's Blessing +5, and it's working out pretty well. It's noticeable, but not enough for me to say I can do this. There was definitely a lot of times that I had some trouble. The most common one was that the bosses would just nosedive right into me. Nosedive right in! A perfect example, too. I finally find this one Erdtree in this one area. And then I go to the grace that I found. Then I notice that there's an open doorway. My first thought is, well, let's just take a look outside and see what's there and stuff. I look out there, and then I see something big kind of running towards me. And I'm like, I'm not putting up with that today right now. So I go to turn around, and there's a fog gate. I'm like, wait a moment. Then I see the HP bar. wait a moment. And then I look up, and there he is, just about to nosedive into me, and I'm like, ah! I wish I had recorded that, because that is the funniest reaction that I've had out of it. And thinking back to it, as much as that pissed me off, that was the funniest thing to happen to me. I ain't gonna lie. It's like after beating it, I calmed down, and I finally realized that was funny, actually, in all honesty. The way that I did that was funny. I should have recorded it, sadly. Another moment was whenever I was climbing up this one mountain, and I found 2 dragons. They're basically normal dragons, but slightly more powered up because of the DLC and everything. So, I was able to beat 1 dragon, so that's not a problem. But whenever I climbed up the mountain, I found 2 dragons, and I'm like, ugh. But then I realized that 1 dragon was fighting the other one, and I'm like, okay, just stand back and wait for one of these 2 to die. I'm hoping that the smaller one will beat the boss dragon, to where I don't have to worry about it as badly. And then all of a sudden I had the stupid idea of like, well, let me just kind of do some tink damage to the boss itself. And as I was doing that, all of a sudden the boss and the other dragon started to kind of wise up and look in my direction. And I'm like, that was my bad. So yeah, it was just one of those things where it's like, it has the same level of like enjoyment that the base game had, except now is a little bit harder and now is a little bit more tense per se. But you do get a lot of runes, so that's a good thing. The DLC offers so much more runes. I think compared to like, you know, obviously some of the final areas, this has to be the one game where this is one area where you get the most runes out of it, and it is insane. I leveled up literally 100 plus more by the time I finally beat the DLC, which is insane. But I finally did get all the Erdtree fragment runes. When I finally did get all of them, I then decided to finally say, okay, let's explore this area. Shouldn't have a problem. On the one hand, I felt kind of bad, because technically I did look up a guide on how to find all these fragments. And even though I did have trouble on 2 or 3 bosses on my way to finding them and all and stuff, for the rest of the time it wasn't as bad, you know? So, some of the dungeons per se, they wasn't as bad to deal with and stuff, and I felt like I cheated the game a little bit in a way. But then by the time I finally fought the actual bosses, then that's whenever they felt like actual bosses, you know what I mean? Like, the quality of bosses have definitely been matched up to the base game of Elden Ring. So, that's a good thing. And I ain't gonna lie, there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of this game. There's a lot of good weapons, so many good weapons. I've found some really awesome boss weapons, and I ain't gonna lie, I like how they look, and how they play, and how they function and stuff. There's so much to do in this game, and just like the base game, the DLC has a lot of hidden stuff, a lot of hidden pathways. You're gonna have to kind of explore a little bit just to figure out where all of it is at and stuff, but by the time you do, it becomes way funner, way entertaining, and again, like I said, it's just like the base game, except now you gotta deal with the Erdtree fragments in order to try to survive long enough, you know what I mean? But unless you got a really good build, that's a different story. So, if I had to rate DLC per se, I would rate this second of the best DLC that's come out of From Software in terms of the Souls series. You know, we have Dark Souls 1 with the, I forgot what his name is, but that one Knight of the Dark Abyss. Then we have Dark Souls 2 with this 3 DLC that they had. Then, of course, you have Bloodborne's DLC, the Old Huntress DLC. Then you have Dark Souls 3 with this 2 DLC. The first one wasn't much to say, but the second one was really good in my personal opinion. And now we have Elden Ring, which is pretty insane, but it's still really good. Again, only 2 problems that I have with the game was the fact that it had like an extra layer of leveling that you have to acquire in order to survive just the basis of the DLC. Because even by the time you do get all of them, they're still hard on their own. So it's not like if you get all the fragments, all of a sudden it turns into easy mode. No, no, no. It turns into normal Elden Ring instead of harder Elden Ring. You know what I mean? No longer enemies are going to be two-shotting you every single time you enter in through the doorway. It just turns into normal Elden Ring, but now you deal with base difficulty, which is hard still. So it's like, it's hard, but not like suicidal hard, if you get what I'm saying. It's ridiculous. But I would just say that it's second best compared to that of the Old Huntress DLC. And the reason why I say the Old Huntress DLC is the best in my personal opinion is because of two factors. Factor number one, the amount of content that you get from the price range. The price range of the Old Huntress DLC was $20. And what you get 5 bosses and a lot of cool weapons and a new area to explore. It's really cool and really awesome, and I still, to my opinion, still believe that that is the best DLC that has ever come out of any form game in my personal opinion. There's been a lot of good DLCs, I won't deny that, but this is one of the very few times where I would say if I had the ability to remember all the DLCs that I played through and rank them from my top 10 and everything like that, this would be probably the number one, just because of the price value and the amount of content and the content itself that you get out of it and stuff. Elden Ring's DLC, while it's very much the same thing, there's a lot of stuff to do, there's a lot of weapons, there's a lot of good gears, there's a lot of cool stuff to do. It's just, again, it's got that layer of difficulty that you gotta be aware of. So depending on your build and depending on your survival skills of the game, you may have a hard time. Now, if you're someone of, like, say, I don't know, probably some of the experts of the Elden Ring community, or Souls community at this rate, they survived it just fine. They found out the hard way that, yes, they do hit hard, but after that, it's like, this ain't too bad. So it's just one of those things where it's like, I would say be prepared to the utmost highest, you know. Don't think for a moment that this game will just give you an easy win. No, it's still hard, but now it's extra hard. So just to forewarn you, but I really enjoyed the DLC. I liked it. And then I fought the final boss of the DLC and I'm like, oh, for the love of gosh. Like, every other boss was fine and I enjoyed them, but this was the one where I was having the most trouble out of all of them, and I had to cheese my way out of it. I don't know if it's cheese or if it's just actually using the game's mechanics to its advantages or stuff like that, but I had to find a way of being like, okay, what can I do to help prevent me from receiving so much damage from this thing? And I found a way, and then I was able to beat it, and I was like, I enjoyed that. You know, it's that weird sense of feeling of where it's like you get so pissed off at something that you couldn't beat it or anything like that, and then by the time you finally beat it, you go, another masterpiece. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next video. This is BlackCross signing off. Catch you guys later.